All right, super excited today because today I am no longer working. It's been a 13-year journey. We got 5 kids, only 3 of them here right now. But yeah, I've been on a single income government government income for the last 10 years. And but yeah, now 13 years later, able to retire, financial independent, took off 147K of golden handcuffs. And what do you got to say? What do you got to say?
You're fired.
You're fired, and we're fired. Financially independent, retire early. We're gonna go over the story, how we did it, step by step. Enjoy. All right, here's a shot with all 5 of the kids, family of 7 now, pretty crazy. And we're gonna share our journey, how we went from negative net worth, in debt, student loan debt in 2010 to millionaires by 2020, and now multi-millionaires. It's a pretty crazy story. You can see our income curves. We're gonna go back to this chart. We'll revisit it, but just a real quick overview. We got married pretty young, right when I graduated college at 23. We tried to save money, tried to save our housing costs, so we moved into my parents' house, rented a bedroom for $500 a month, and we both were working $50,000 jobs, so making $100,000 total. We were able to save $75,000 in 2 years' time. We bought this 4-family in Garfield, New Jersey in 2015, and then 2 years later in North Arlington, we were able to buy a 3-family. 2 years after that, we bought another 4-family in Lyndhurst, New Jersey, and this was all in the super high cost of living New York City area. So we're gonna go over that detailed, how we're able to save $75,000 in 2 years. Our frugal lifestyle that enables all that, and all the tricks that we did to do all that, and our journey there. And I wouldn't say we live a very depressed lifestyle or deprived lifestyle. We do our frugal lifestyle pretty fantastically, I'd say. And I want to share a little bit about my life purpose statement, because I think that can tell you a little bit more about me and what drives me. So my life purpose is to be a role model with a sound body, no addictions, financial independence, and a strong, loving family that can inspire and empower others to invest in their families. So that's what's important to me. I've always been super entrepreneurial since I was 10 years old. I'd pray for snow. Whenever it snowed, we'd shovel all the neighborhood's driveways, me and my brother and a friend. And yeah, I'd always look forward to that. I got into eBay pretty early when I was 13. By the time I was 17, I had 300 transactions on eBay, just constantly selling things all the time and making money that way. When I was 17 years old, I started thinking about transportation and how I could make money to buy. Actually, it ended up being a motorcycle. So I started selling glow sticks at 4th of July festivals, just $1 a piece. And in one summer, I made enough to buy my motorcycle. I looked for a couple weeks on Craigslist and ended up buying this thing I called it the White Ninja, for $2,000. But I knew I could resell this thing for $3,000. And I was like, hey, I could just, start buying maybe cars and flipping them. So buying them cheap and just reselling them for more. So I ended up doing that. Oh, and I just wanted to share, the reason I bought a motorcycle and not a car is car insurance for a young kid, because my dad wouldn't let me go on his plan, was $2,000 a year. But motorcycle insurance was only $300 a year. And you get good gas mileage. So it was just a win-win. I thought they were pretty cool too, so I went with the motorcycle. But I had that idea, how do I start doing this car flipping business? So I started working at Taco Bell as a senior in high school. I would go there after school and just work as a cashier, and I worked there for 6 months. The day I quit, I bought my first car. It was a 1999 Mitsubishi Mirage. Bought it for $1,400, and 13 days later I sold it for $2,850. Hardly had to do any work to it, just cleaned it up, and I did that 19 more times. I bought all these cars, and that's what paid my tuition my first 2 years of college. I was just buying and selling cars. And then in my junior and senior year of college, I got this thing called a Department of Defense Smart Scholarship, which paid my tuition, so no longer had to worry about that, which was awesome. This is a great scholarship. And gave me $25,000 cash in my pocket. I was getting $2,000 checks every month. It was great, and I share this because there's a lot of people in STEM majors, science, technology, engineering, and math. You just have to be a U.S. citizen, need a 3.0 GPA, and every year you accept the award, you have to work for the government for 2 years. As a civilian, you don't have to enlist or anything, just civilian facilities are all over the nation. State-of-the-art facilities. I got to run this cool program called RAMBO, Rapid Additively Manufactured Ballistics Ordnance. I came up with that name. I thought it was pretty cool. It got published on Fox News, Popular Mechanics. We 3D printed a grenade grenade launcher and fired it. So pretty cool stuff. With that extra money, so many of my cohort of smart scholars, they're getting paid $25,000 a year. They just bought themselves like Mustangs, nice fancy cars. I started getting into the stock market, not knowing what I was doing in the beginning. I was just investing in things I knew, like Google, Netflix, Toyota, things like that. I've since, just kind of gone to low-cost index funds, mostly pouring all my money in the S&P 500, and that's what I would recommend for most young people. And I've seen the growth, it's pretty incredible. In my Roth IRA, I've invested cash total $65,000 to date. Now it's worth $167,000. I started this journey about 14 years ago. My wife's IRA, we've invested $75,000. It's currently worth $142,000, so about double. My 401k at work, $103,000, now worth $258,000. So like 2.5 times. So pretty crazy, and we were able to, just by being frugal, max out our Roth IRAs and 401ks. And that's led to, pretty significant, like $500,000 worth of stock accounts towards retirement. So when I was 23 years old, graduated from Stevens as a mechanical engineer, married my wife, as I mentioned. So interesting fact, average wedding cost in the U.S. is $34,000. In New Jersey, in the New York City area, we live $62,000. Our 100-person wedding cost us $2,600. Super proud of that, and it was nice, napkins, and anyway, check out our post, faninvestor.com/wedding, if you are planning a wedding, because we have a lot of good tips on how we were able to do it at a birthday party rate, essentially. We went on a nice honeymoon, travel hacked, which is using credit card miles to pay for our flight. Went all the way to Hawaii and road tripped all the way back to New Jersey from California. Like I mentioned before, we, instead of buying a nice cozy apartment, we just moved into a bedroom that my parents had, and I worked as an engineer, $50,000 a year. And, now I'm retired, but I was making about $147,000 a year. That was kind of hard to say no to. And I'm going to go over like that decision making and why I said no to $147,000 a year. But before I do that, I want to talk about a quick example, because when I was younger, I used to think like $50,000 a year, that's an insane amount of money. I'd be set for life. And, $50,000 maybe not that much, but if you want to double it in your mind, $100,000, you can do that. But let's say after taxes, after Social Security, all those expenses, really your take-home pay from $50,000 is $36,500. And if you want to double it to, $70,000 take-home pay with a $100,000 salary, go for it. There's 365 days in a year. Divide that money by 365, and you're left with about $100 a day of buying power. $100 a day seems like a lot of money, but let's say you rented a nice apartment, $1,500 a month these days. That'll get you a shack pretty much. So that's $50 a day going towards housing, about half what you're making on a $50,000 salary just going to housing. Housing is the most expensive expense most people have. So you're left with $50 a day, and you have expenses. Maybe you buy breakfast, maybe you buy lunch, maybe you buy dinner. So you have some leftover money, but maybe you have the other things that pop up like gas that day, or you got to buy some clothes. And savings is income minus expenses. So you can see from this example how quickly that $50,000 dwindles to nothing. Because you got to pay other things. There's recurring expenses. Maybe you have a Netflix subscription. Maybe you have health insurance. You got to pay car insurance, utilities, phone bills. And just so quickly. I like this example because if you're not budgeting, if you're not keeping track of your expenses, you're not going to save. So our mentality when my wife and I were getting together was, we didn't want to buy things. We didn't want to buy subscriptions. We wanted to buy our freedom. And, we realized a little bit of inconvenience can lead to a lot of happiness. So many people want the nicest things, and I get it, nice fancy Tesla, super cool, but you're paying so much money for it. We just bought a $3,000 car 10 years ago that's still driving today with 100,000 miles. And we bought it for $3,000. We can sell it tomorrow for $5,000, everyone's getting like the latest iPhone every single year because they want the nicest thing. People go out to eat all the time. New Yorkers spend on average $8,000 a year eating out. That $3 a day expense can lead to $1,000 a year. Just buying and changing that habit can be so powerful. I was talking to my coworker who gets a haircut every 2 weeks, and let's say he spends $34 for that haircut. I've never paid for a haircut in my life. My mom used to cut it, now my wife cuts it. I've calculated that in the 30 years that I could have been paying for haircuts, I've saved almost $25,000. Isn't that incredible? And so, we do so many of these frugal things, and I want to share those. And that's kind of what allows us to buy our freedom now. Why my wife hasn't had to work in the last 10 years, could raise our family, and then now I don't have to work either, and we could be a stay-at-home family. Live our dreams the way we want to. So this is how we live frugally and do it awesomely. Like I said, we lived at home, paying my parents $500 a month. This is how we saved $75,000 in 2 years. On a $100,000 dual income. We packed our own lunches to work. Going out to eat every day is so expensive, and then you got to pay tip and all that. We lived off a cash budget of $450 a month each. So at the beginning of the month, we'd go to the ATM. My wife would get $450. I'd get $450, and that's all we would spend for any out-of-pocket expenses. So that's groceries, that's gas, and all that kind of stuff. We cut our own hair at home. We rarely ever went out to eat. We bought everything used off eBay, Craigslist, Facebook Marketplace, or garage sales. Very rare to have, maybe underwear is new, but like very rare to have anything that was new. Even our kitchen dining table for, 10 years. It was a tiny IKEA dining table that we found in the garbage and that we ate on for 10 years. We resell unwanted things and clutter. We don't pay for cable or TV. We don't even have a TV. We've never owned one. We don't drink alcohol or coffee. So that's a huge expense too, especially tips on alcohol is so expensive. We travel for cheap via travel hacking, and we don't do tourist traps. We love hiking. We love camping. We love just immersing ourselves in the local culture. So we don't do the expensive things. But, my son, by the time he was 6 months old, we had been to like 13 countries and now 20 countries. So we travel a lot, but we do it very intentionally and very strategically. We pay less than $24 a month each for our cell phone service. We have a T-Mobile unlimited family plan. I think it's grandfathered now for 10 people. And like I said, we bought reliable used cars, a Honda Fit that we're still driving today, a Yaris, which I'll talk about later, with roll-up windows that actually made me money. And I'll talk about how we could do that. And we didn't collect massive amounts of student debt. We were working. I had a work study as a machinist during college. I was flipping cars. And even while doing all that, I was taking 23 credit semesters. So we were very serious. And by the time I was 25 years old, we had our first child. That's Valen at 6 months old. And that was when we started thinking about buying our first house. Okay, talking about finance a little bit, there's offensive finances, income, defensive finances, expenses, and then cash flow is the mix of those, income and expenses. And assets are something that pay you, liabilities are something that cost you. And, most people, when they start thinking about houses, they think about their dream house, like maybe this house on the left here, nice green lawns, fenced-in property, and just a beautiful brick exterior, But, my wife and I, we were all about that freedom. My wife was homeschooled K through 12. She had that dream to homeschool our own kids. So that meant a single income. And we were like, how are we going to do that? So that's why we bought this thing on the right. What do you think? Would you want the property on the left or the right? Everyone would say the left, but the right was buying our freedom. The left was buying a liability. The right was buying an asset. So we bought this 4-family property. That was our first real estate purchase. And we bought it for our freedom. We saw what it could do. We bought it for $430,000. We put 10% down, $43,000. There was closing costs involved. We got an interest rate at 4%. So we had to bring $43,000 to the table. There's a 2-family in the back, a 2-family in the front. We did a lot of work to it. It was a bank-owned property. I think Wells Fargo owned it. And they had a deal for first-time home buyers. So we were there was so many investors who wanted this thing, but they just couldn't buy it. Only first-time home buyers could buy it. So we were competing with 3 other people, and we ended up getting it. So that was great. One tip for you, we worked with the listing agent. So they became a dual agent. They got dual commission. So I don't know. I think it helped us to work with a listing agent. So that might be something you want to do. So a lot of work. My wife had just given birth and she's working on tiles, sidewalks, and things like that. So why do we do this? Why did we buy a 4-family property, and why was the key to our financial success? You saw in the example before how expensive housing can be. Even if you're renting a property, 50% of your income for most people goes towards housing. So you got to pay for a mortgage, property tax, insurance, utilities, water bill, sewer bill. The total for this property is $3,000 a month. And that's not even that different from a single family. You know, a single family might be slightly cheaper, maybe 20% cheaper, but it's not going to be that much cheaper. $40,000 a year expense, you know. But with this property, we have rental income. You know, we get to live in unit 1 for free. Unit 2, we rented out to family for a reduced cost. Unit 3, we're getting $1,700 a month. Unit 4, $1,800 a month. We were charging for parking. We have a coin-operated laundry for all the tenants to use. That's $4,600 a month. So this property, we actually got to live for free, so no housing expense. You know, we don't have to give away that 50% of our income. We could save that now. And we're making money. You know, $1,000 a month we could make. And we get in 30 years a paid off property. So we're getting equity. We're getting tax deductions for all these expenses. So, you know, it was just such a big win was starting our life out with this 4-family property. You know, they call it house hacking. You know, we could have bought a single family, but then, you know, we wouldn't have been able to grow. All our savings has to go towards the house expense. And now we could just save the money and make money. And it was a lot of work. You know, we tried to make it as beautiful as we could. I think we did a great job. There's some before and afters for you. We added value by putting coin-operated laundry for all the tenants to use rather than having to go to a laundromat. And you know, it was a lot of work, but well worth it. And I'll go into more of our journey. But yeah, here just, you know, like I said, a lot of work. My wife had just given birth, and you know, a lot of late nights painting. But yeah, like I mentioned, comfort does not equal happiness. You know, everything worthwhile in life is attained through hard work. Happiness is not an exception. You know, so many people are unhappy because they have this life vision for life. Maybe they want to retire early, but, you know, the reality is just so far from their life vision. And that gap, you know, caused a lot of unhappiness. And, you know, a lot of people take this instant gratification approach to life when really to be happy, you know, you need this disciplined long-term happiness. So just a quick lesson here, you know, this is ease of fast food versus preparing a wholesome home-cooked meal. Ease of borrowing on credit versus sticking to a disciplined budget. Ease of playing video games versus working out. Ease of watching TV versus the mental focus required for reading books. Lust of sexual release versus integrity and respect for oneself. Not making waves, staying in a comfort zone versus confronting and growing. Sleeping in versus working on your personal goals. Letting life happen to you versus taking ownership of your dreams. You know, Jocko Willink says discipline equals freedom, and I believe that so much. And throughout our journey of success, a lot of it had to do with dealing with going through the disciplined long-term approach. You know, a lot of this is hard work, but it allows us to live out our dreams. So now, you know, this 4-family property brings in close to $100,000 a year in gross rent. So these are the updated rents that this property is giving us. And also in that same year, we started exploring, you know, we were always exploring passive income streams. Like, how can we have more passive income stream so we don't have to work anymore? And I'm going to go into those numbers of what that looks like now and why I don't have to work, why I could say goodbye to that $147,000 income. So, so we brought our baby, our Valen, from the hospital, and, you know, they gave us these pacifiers at the hospital, but, you know, we lost it. He was crying. I'm like, where do I find it? I go to Target, I go to Walmart, no pacifiers, not this pacifier, the only one he wants. He doesn't want those Walmart, Target ones. So I go on forums and I'm like, everyone's like talking about this hospital pacifier that no one can find. So I ended up sourcing it and selling it on eBay. But eBay is annoying because I had to mail everything, I had to box everything, I had to ship it out, and it was just annoying doing it. It was selling like hotcakes, but I was just like, how do I sell this without, you know, being the middleman and shipping everything? So, you know, I found out about Amazon FBA, fulfilled by Amazon. So we started sourcing by the thousands and shipping it to Amazon's warehouses. And then whenever there was a sale, Amazon would ship it for us. You know, in the first year we did this, we made $30,000 selling pacifiers, which is crazy. But, you know, the competitors hopped on our listing. It wasn't our product, so other people could start selling. We started undercutting each other, so we just gave that up. But, you know, I got a patent last year. I'll talk about that a little more. And I plan to sell that on Amazon and other places, and no one should be able to compete because it's a full patent. And that's another passive income stream that I plan to focus on. You know, I always suggest to other people too to, you know, live their lives intentionally. You know, we do goals every single year. I do it with the kids now. You can watch on our YouTube channel. I have a goal setting video how to do it with kids. But yeah, I thought this was interesting. This was our 5-year snapshot that we made in 2017. And 5 years later would have been 2022. And it was just so interesting how much of this stuff that we wrote down became, you know, came to fruition. And we had a second baby, we bought a second house, potty train, we went to Alaska, we had a third baby, bought a minivan. I wanted to retire in 2019, so that didn't quite happen. It's now 6 years after that I finally was able to retire. That was a reach goal. The goal was because my wife had retired, I think at 29. I was like, I want to retire too. And yeah, so anyway, it's important to set those goals. So that second house, we ended up finding it on Craigslist, for sale by owner. I think it was listed at $375,000. We ended up closing at $350,000, and currently that property brings in $63,000 a year gross rent. There's a quick before and after shot. 2 years after that, so we bought that in 2017. 2 years after we bought Garfield, and then 2 years after that, we bought this 4-family in Lyndhurst, New Jersey, and that brings in $114,000 a year. So all three of these properties bring in a total of $274,000 a year. Of course, that's gross rent. There's a lot of expenses with these properties. $13,000 taxes, $24,000 mortgage. All these properties have taxes, mortgage, insurance, utilities, maintenance expenses. So total operating expenses about $148,000 for these properties. But there's a lot of profit there. Enough profit to enable our freedom. So net profit about $120,000 a year from these 3 properties alone. 11 units enable our freedom. And we live a pretty frugal lifestyle, so that pays for all our expenses. And I'll go into my special spreadsheet. I think a lot of you have seen that. It's very popular. But I'll go into, showing you what our expenses are and how that income plays a factor. But I just think this chart's so powerful because it can show you how just 3 properties, we went from one to the next, and it was just a natural progression, and that's enabling our freedom now in our lives and being a stay-at-home family, fulfilling our dreams. So yeah, I have all these ideas to, grow businesses and things like that, but we don't need it. We are financially independent. We're always trying to add value. In 2019 and that property in Garfield, there was a storage room, and like, hey, we're not doing anything with this. We made up some plans, and, we cleaned it up, and we turned it into this successful Airbnb. It was the most popular Airbnb until Garfield banned Airbnbs. But, bringing my Japanese heritage, we had people sleeping on the floor, built a heated kotatsu table, put in a projector so people could watch Japanese anime DVDs. When I was 30 years old, we had a third baby, and we bought a minivan. And so we had 3 cars, and I was like, hey, what do I do with my roll-up window Toyota Yaris? And so I started renting it actually on Turo. Turo is like kind of the Airbnb for cars. And I would just rent it for $34 a day, and people would rent it all the time. And I was just, I was in Garfield, New Jersey. But then even when we moved to a more rural area, it was getting rented every day. Someone rented it for an 80-day trip. Paid me $1,300 to rent this thing. First year, I made $6,000 renting this out. The second year, I made $5,500 renting it out. And then, unfortunately, someone hit some black ice and hit a guardrail. No one was hurt, but totaled my car. But Turo paid me $4,000 for the car. So in total, I think I made $18,000 for this $5,000 car after I put on, 70,000 miles on it. So pretty big win. Other passive income streams, I have a blog, faninvestor.com. A lot of case studies of everything we've done in more detail can be found there. So that brings in a little bit of money through affiliate links. We have a podcast my wife and I host, up to 97 episodes. A lot of good content there. Definitely check that out. We're going to revamp it, try to make it for large families focused. A lot of tips and tricks on, just family, finance, and freedom. There's a preview of some of those episodes. Some cool stories in there. And a lot of our own stories as well. Here's some of that Amazon affiliate income. So not much, about like $700 a year just on clicks that people click on. We have a YouTube channel. YouTube, I'm investing a lot more. We just hit 10,000 subscribers. Super excited about that. You guys are watching this on YouTube, so subscribe. If you can leave a comment, if you can, I think, hit that notification bell. Everyone always says that. Please do that. Please consider. Thank you. Brought in $1,900 last year, which is, it's pretty sweet. Hoping to make that into a more successful channel. Goal is to hit 25,000 subscribers this year. So if you can help us do that, that would be appreciated. We started doing this thing called midterm rentals where, even the towns that ban Airbnb, we can still rent them out month to month. And so with these furnished rentals, bring in a little bit more money. So just always trying to maximize. Yeah, and then in 2020, we finally bought our single family house. And that 2019 goal to retire, we could have done it if I didn't buy the single family house. But we were living in a tiny apartment in our rental, and it was just like we didn't have a blade of grass, and it was just like, well, what do we want to do? Do we want to continue to be frugal and sacrifice, or is it time to kind of enjoy some of the fruits of our labor? So we ended up buying this single family house in this little tiny town where I could bicycle to work. That was one of the criteria. It had a lake, it had a creek, it had a pool. And it was a great place, and especially during COVID hit right when we closed on this property. So if we had been trapped in that apartment, we would have been gone a little crazy with all of our kids. So this was just a lifesaver and such a good choice. Oh, here's just some of the criteria. Just always very intentional with every single thing we do. So we labeled exactly what we wanted. We want low taxes, we wanted a creek, we wanted a lake, we wanted a backyard and backs up to woods, and then bicycle distance to my work, all these different things, cul-de-sac. And so we bought this property, and it was kind of like a diamond in the rough because it wasn't being utilized right. It was kind of a jungle in the backyard area. We pulled out all this junk that the previous owners had dumped back there, and we really fixed it up, made it into this oasis for our family. And transform the property, and we have so much fun with it. We bought all these kayaks and paddle boats, and even a little sunfish sailboat, which we enjoy. And we get to do all these cool things now on the lake, where we do ice plunges, and just get to go ice skating. We went this winter. We went from one lake half a mile across to another lake, and then another lake. And course record on the lake right now is held by me and Justin at 13 minutes. So pretty proud of that. And then in 2022, when I was 31, we had our fourth baby. And that's kind of our journey, haven't done much real estate since 2019 or 2020. And that's how we went from, negative net worth to being millionaires. And it was just, being very intentional, being very frugal, and being very strategic with a lot of our spending. But also just living a very balanced life. Physical health is very important to me. I'm doing an Ironman at towards the end of this year, full Ironman. So that includes running a marathon, 112-mile bike ride, and a 2.4-mile swim. Family and relationships, that's why I quit my job, because I saw my wife struggling with all 5 kids at home. I could keep working, keep collecting that paycheck, and it would be good. Health insurance, all good. A lot of uncertainties going this route of saying goodbye to that and just living off rental income. But I want to prove that it works. By the numbers, it works. I'll go into those numbers. And, just that family is important, and it's been a goal to be a stay-at-home family. And I think that's world school our kids. That's our plan. We want to actually Airbnb our house when we travel, so we actually make money when we travel. Anyway, just want to live a wholesome lifestyle where everything's in balance. We took a year, actually work paid for us to go to Japan for a year. I worked for the Japanese Ministry of Defense for a year, which was a really cool, awesome experience. And we just got to travel, live in a 100-year-old Japanese house. My older 2 boys were enrolled in the local Japanese elementary school, not knowing a lick of Japanese. They didn't even know how to count to 3. But by the end of it, reading faster in Japanese than English. We got to explore the whole country. I took a 300-mile bicycle ride around Japan. We brought our elderly parents with us. My dad would every Monday he would go to the local school and read English books to the local children. They loved him. But I was so work was great. Gave us a lot of opportunities. Really loved the pay was good. I enjoyed it. But it's something the world needs. I really believe in the mission I was doing for the warfighter, enabling them with the best technology so that they can protect us, protect the world, and be a good leader for the world. But, I don't feel like it's what I loved. So there's certain things missing. So this is ikigai, a Japanese concept meaning a reason for being. So it wasn't quite hitting the core of who I wanted to be. And, I think the unique skill sets that I can bring to this world. So that just goes back to that life purpose statement and why I felt like it was necessary for me to, take off those golden handcuffs and start making my own dreams a reality. Yeah, so I talked about that patent. So I got a patent last year. I did it all myself. I feel like I took like a master's course on how to write a patent. I listened to this guy about, how to write a patent on a podcast. I listened to 20 of his episodes, ended up writing my own patent. I did hire a patent attorney for 1 hour just to review all my claim literature and all that. Yeah, he reviewed it. He thought it was great. I made a few tweaks, and then I was able to get a full patent for $300. Normally, people when they go through a lawyer pay like $30,000 for a patent, and I was able to get mine for $300. So super frugal, and very intentional. And I think I did a great job. And my plan is to start selling this on Amazon. And the goal is to get on Shark Tank. So if anyone has connections on Shark Tank and wants to help me get on there, please let me know. So now I kind of want to go into that spreadsheet I was talking about and how we're able to do this. Okay, so this is my Finja spreadsheet, Financial Ninja spreadsheet. You can go to faninvestor.com/spreadsheet if you want to get a copy of your own. So, previously I had a $147,000 gross salary. And $275,000 in passive rental income. So gross income of $422,000, total expenses of $253,000. Expenses come from these bills and recurring expenses. Everything from a phone bill to kids' activities to health insurance to mortgages to tithing to Adobe Creative Cloud account. So all those expenses equate to $266,000, and then our monthly budget. So for the out-of-pocket expenses, we allow ourselves $1,200 for groceries, $300 for eating out. All these different expenses equate to $3,900 a month or $46,000 a year. So total expense of about $253,000. So in total, we were able to save about $168,000 a year, which is pretty incredible. But once we zero out that salary, this is what happens. So we zero out that salary, and then our savings goes to about $20,000. So a buffer of about $20,000, which is not bad. I'm not looking to keep expanding our wealth too much. I mean, it'd be great, it'd be awesome, but we have our financial freedom. All our expenses are met purely from the gross rental income. And I think that's why it's so, a budget can be so freeing. Yes, it's annoying. Yes, to track expenses. But to know that you are financially independent, to know you can walk away from your job and be all right, it's so powerful. So we should be able to still save about $21,000 a year. And so we have about like $4.4 million in assets, and that just comes mainly from those real estate properties that we bought through the years. We have some stocks, we have some savings, but mainly it's 401k. Mainly, that's coming from the real estate, and it just appreciated well. But we're not living off the 4% rule. Some of you know about the 4% rule. You have $1 million in your stock account. You can withdraw safely 4%, so like $40,000 a year. Maybe it was $2 million. That's $80,000 a year. You can withdraw safely, and it should continue to grow. And you can just live off that. We don't really want to tap into that, so we love this method of financial freedom through rental real estate because it just seems a lot more stable. Even if the market crashes, it's not really going to affect our 4% rule because we're not relying on that. The rental income should still, everyone always needs a place to live. And even if a housing market crashes, maybe the sellers need a place to live or previous owners need a place to rent. So we're not too worried or concerned about the market, and pretty excited about, having that retirement strategy. Anyway, I really recommend this spreadsheet. You can just get it on my website. Again, faninvestor.com/spreadsheet. A lot of instructions there on how to use it. It goes over your net worth, your savings rate, all of that. I love tracking all the recurring expenses. So many people are paying for subscriptions they have no idea that they're paying for, and then love, that monthly budget and what you are, my wife and I agree on what we're going to be spending for that month. We want to slowly creep up this travel budget. That is the spreadsheet. Okay, I know that was a ton of info, but thanks for watching this whole entire video. Definitely leave us comments if you have any questions. I probably missed some things. Like I didn't even talk about health insurance. We're planning to just go to healthcare.gov, Affordable Care Act, and just get our insurance in the marketplace. I was getting quoted $400 and $600, which is what we're currently paying anyway, so not too worried about that. We're leading an exciting life. I'm excited for this next journey. We've already been traveling a lot. I already do micro adventures once a month. I have a video on that if you don't know what that is. But now we're location independent. We homeschool, so we're not. We do have a local homeschool co-op every Friday. I teach personal finance, and I teach STEM. I coach soccer. So there's things that tie us into the community. But we're gonna travel so much more. Like I said, we're gonna Airbnb our house. We're gonna make more money while we travel than we spend. So why not travel all the time? and a world school, the kids. It's just going to be so exciting. Already this week, being off of work, I've been able to, I've had the freedom to teach my daughter to ski. First time that, I didn't have to harness her up. She could just go down the mountain. So that was super thrilling. I taught my 3-year-old how to pedal bike. He was ready. He's been doing the balance bike thing. In like 20 minutes, I taught him how to pedal bike, and we worked on it all day. But it's just awesome to have this freedom and to, live out the dreams I want. So, if you're interested in family, finance, and freedom, this is the channel for you. Definitely subscribe. We're going to relaunch the podcast soon, and we're going to cater it towards large families, so especially if you're a large family. But even if you're not, if you're thinking about families or anything finance, freedom related, definitely subscribe. Well, hope you enjoyed that. Hope you got something out of it. If you did, please leave a comment. I'd love to hear it. And with that, I'm going to bed. Godspeed.